Hi, I'm Kirsty Cullen, CEO at the Optimum Health Clinic, and I'm delighted to continue our Cuppa and Chat series with Anastasia Smith from Genova Diagnostics. Anastasia, I wanted to ask you more about functional gut testing and why it's so relevant within the whole fatigue picture.
Yeah, so when we're looking at functional gut testing, we're not just ruling out, whether there is a pathogen, which describes a type of organism that has potentially can cause an infection. We're not just looking at that. We're looking at functional markers. So we're looking at your ability to digest and absorb nutrients. We're looking at your sort of local inflammation that's going on within the gut and the gut barrier. And we're also looking at the general overview of your balance and your microbiome. So that looks at the overall ecology in your gut and the balance between organisms that we know have a beneficial impact on the gut and your overall health, as well as organisms that when, in overabundance, they may exert sort of negative impacts. And in relation to the fatigue, sort of picture, there are various things, various aspects of those things that can be very relevant. So, for example, with digestion and absorption, of course, if you aren't able to absorb certain nutrients, then you may feel fatigued. Simple things like iron, B12, all of the important sort of surrounding nutrients for your red blood cell health and your ability to carry oxygen around the body. Amino acids and proteins, essential as well for our, overall energy and vitality. And the test really does look into all of those things. It looks at your ability to produce gastric secretions that are really essential for the absorption and emulsification of certain nutrients, so that we can actually, absorb and utilize them in our cells around the body. So that's one piece I would say, definitely relevant in relation to fatigue. And then we're looking at other things like inflammation, for example, which on a fundamental level can contribute to fatigue. We know that, for example, when there is inflammation, that can have an impact on our stress hormones like cortisol, which we sort of spoke about in the previous Cuppa and Chat video. So inflammation can impact our nervous system on that sort of level. It can also lead to something called intestinal permeability, which I'm sure many of you know about as leaky gut, which is the sort of more general term for that picture. And what happens in that context is that the contents of our bowels, toxins, organisms, food allergens, can leak through into our blood circulation, and that can cause more for sort of low-grade systemic inflammation, and that can tax our energy production. It can tax our mitochondrial function, and that really is a sort of the fundamental basis of our energy. So that can affect our fatigue through sort of that very sort of roundabout way. And then we have the sort of balance between the organisms that I mentioned before. The beneficial sort of organisms are very important for also producing B vitamins. That nutrients like folate, for example, are produced by organisms in our gut, and then therefore can contribute to our ability to carry oxygen around the body. And they also play important roles in immune regulation, in our mood. So they're very sort of sensitive ways of looking at fatigue. They're not very sort of diagnostic tests, but as I mentioned before, they're sort of preventative ways that we can look at, on a sort of in a comprehensive level, what's going on globally, so that we can support this person from various angles to make sure they're getting what they need in terms of their nutrition, in terms of preventing inflammation, in terms of taking the burden off of their nervous system so that they can function properly and optimally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that there can be a lot of trepidation around sample collection, actually.
Yes.
So I wonder if you
Especially when
could...
it comes to stool testing.
Yeah, exactly
Yeah.
that. I wonder if you could talk us through what someone will have to do in terms of their sample collection, what that process actually looks like.
Yeah, sure. So with stool testing, and particularly our test, which is called the GI Effect Comprehensive Stool Test, It's a 3-day stool sample. Doesn't necessarily have to be consecutive days, because I know some people have problems with producing a stool on a day-to-day basis. So it doesn't necessarily have to be consecutive, but it is a 3-day stool sample. And within each of those days and each of those samples, we're looking at various things where we use various methodologies in our tests. We use culture analysis, PCR analysis, microscopic, as well as other things. And so it's a very comprehensive sort of look into how your digestive system is working. We recommend, this is a guideline for the instructions, that the stool samples are refrigerated. So of course you will have to tell your family or whoever it is that you live with, apologies, just for the next few days, just, hide it away somewhere at the back of the fridge so that they don't have to even contemplate, what it is.
That would be quite the surprise, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's fairly straightforward. You're just collecting a stool sample basically, and the instructions might be a bit overwhelming, but when you sort of give yourself time to digest them, excuse the pun, it is pretty straightforward. Yeah.
And obviously there's so much that we can do with a set of gut test results in hand from a nutritional perspective. Once that work is done, is there a tendency just to rely on a reduction in sort of signs and symptoms gastrointestinally, or do you find that people retest these markers some months down the line, and sort of what would that interval look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a question that we get quite often. So I guess it falls onto various things. So first of all is the patient's budget. Do they have enough flexibility to be retesting? Of course, in the ideal world, we would always want to be retesting, because the more data we have, the more the less guesswork we have to do, right? We know, whether the interventions that we've recommended are, at least from a data perspective, are working or not. Of course, symptoms are very important to also track. But it is great to have that facility of looking at, whether, for example, an overabundance of a particular type of organism has been addressed, or whether they are now producing, the gastric secretions like your stomach acid or bile production, or your pancreatic enzymes are more robust and more healthy. So it is definitely recommended. In terms of how long, someone may want to wait before they retest, it very much depends on the interventions and the therapy that the therapist has provided. So it may be, 2 months, it may be 3 months, it may be longer, depending on the symptom progression as well. I always think it's a bit of a minefield in terms of sort of knowing when to retest, but I think it's a combination of tracking the person's symptoms, seeing how they're getting on, and then also sort of working out whether they're flexible enough to do that, to re-engage with testing.
Yeah. And are there any foods or supplements that a client should think about pausing just before testing? Because that's the question we get quite a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a very convenient timeline in terms of what you need to be thinking about leading up to a stool test on our website, as well as in the instructions that you receive in the test kit. But the fundamental thing is that probiotics and antibiotics. So obviously probiotics are supplements, antibiotics medication, but they fundamentally minimum 2 weeks need to be avoided prior to taking stool samples. That's a minimum, but ideally 4 weeks. And then when it comes to other things, so laxatives, any antacids, let me think what else, anything sort of related to gut health, you may want to wait a couple of days prior to collection. Tricky with someone that has, for example, quite significant acid reflux, and then they're on a PPI, for example. If they are adding on H. pylori to the test, the recommendation, unfortunately, is to remove the PPIs. But if they're very dependent on it, unfortunately, it's probably going to be a tricky thing for them to avoid. But yeah, the sort of main thing is to avoid the probiotics for a minimum of 2 weeks, as well as antibiotics prior to testing.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Really good. Because there's nothing more annoying than having completed that test and then finding that out afterwards.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Anastasia. We will catch up again to talk about nutrient evaluation. And as always, in the meantime, you can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, or see us online at www.theoptimumhealthclinic.com.